started with a list of products, prices, and promises back in 2018 when the words tariff war first hit our headlines. For most of us, it felt distant, numbers on screens, economic jargon that didn't touch our daily lives. But quietly, almost invisibly, the ripple effects were already on their way. That list became a warning shot. The United States and China, two of the world's largest economies, had entered a high-stakes standoff. At first, it was framed as a dispute over fairness, unfair trade practices, intellectual property theft, imbalances in exports. It felt manageable, negotiable, temporary, but it wasn't. Over the past few years, what began as a war of percentages and policies has evolved into something far more dangerous. It's no longer just about trade. It's about power, dominance, and global influence. It's about Taiwan. It's about fentanyl. It's about cyber warfare and military buildup. And yes, some say it might even be about war. If you're sitting in Los Angeles or Kansas City or Boston, you might be wondering, why does this matter to me? Why should I care about tariffs on Chinese steel or rare earth minerals? Well, look around your home, your phone, your fridge, even your prescription meds. The cost of living has gone up, and this conflict is part of the reason. Supply chains have been disrupted. American companies are paying more to make, move, and sell the products we use every day. And that means so are we. And it's not just about prices. It's about the deeper shift in how the world works and where America stands in it. Because today, the trade war is no longer just a trade war. It's a mirror reflecting where we're headed and what kind of global future we're building, whether we realize it or not. So in this video, we're going to walk through how this conflict has evolved, why it's bigger than ever, and what it means for all of us. Whether you're a voter, a business owner, a student, or just someone trying to make sense of the headlines, this is your story too. Let's start at the beginning, before this war became about so much more than trade. Some leaders build peace by building bridges. Others build it by burning them. Here's something that might surprise you. Xi Jinping doesn't see confrontation as the opposite of cooperation. In fact, he believes confrontation is the path to cooperation. It's a core part of his political mindset, what some scholars call cooperation through confrontation. That sounds contradictory, right? But to Xi, pressure isn't just a tactic, it's a belief system. In his world, strength earns respect, and compromise is often seen as weakness. And that belief has deep roots in China's political history. Let's take a moment to rewind to the Mao era. Back in the 1950s, during the Korean War, Mao Zedong famously declared that China is not to be trifled with. Instead of backing down under Western pressure, he chose a confrontational path, even when it came at great human and economic cost. It was never about efficiency. It was about pride, power, and sending a message. Xi Jinping has drawn heavily from that playbook. In fact, just recently, Chinese state media posted a clip of Mao during the Korean War with the caption, "We will fight until we win." That wasn't nostalgia, it was a signal. Xi sees confrontation not as a gamble, but as a way to control the terms of engagement. He's used this same approach in trade negotiations, in his stance on Taiwan, and in how he manages internal dissent. He's not trying to avoid conflict, he's trying to use it. Now, personally, I find this philosophy both fascinating and deeply unsettling. Because while it might serve to consolidate power at home, it puts the world, and especially the Indo-Pacific, on edge. If your negotiating strategy is built on tension, then de-escalation becomes a threat to your authority. And that's a dangerous place to be for any leader. You see, this isn't just about political theory. It plays out in real policy. It explains why China has doubled down on military drills near Taiwan, why it's rapidly building a navy to mirror the US, why economic pressure has turned into threats of war. And to me, what's most concerning isn't just the strategy itself, but how much of it is built on fear. Fear of losing control, fear of appearing weak, fear of repeating the humiliations of the past. That fear is fueling decisions that affect us all. And while the world watches, wondering if Xi is bluffing. His track record suggests otherwise. So what does all this mean for how China engages with the US and why the military buildup is happening now? To understand that, we need to look at the next front, one that's invisible to the eye but increasingly powerful, the cyber battlefield. Let's talk about that next. What if I told you there's an app on Chinese soldiers' phones that maps out US military bases, troop insignias, and key commanders? No, it's not a rumor. It's called Strong Enemy Atlas, and it's real. This app was recently made mandatory for officers in the People's Liberation Army. Its purpose? To familiarize troops with their potential enemy, you guessed it, the United States. But this isn't just about digital flashcards. It's part of a broader campaign inside China's military and political circles to mentally prepare for war, or at least to look like they are. Now let's take a step back and ask the obvious question. Is this a sign that China is truly preparing for a military conflict? Or is this psychological warfare? Because here's the thing, authoritarian regimes are masters of perception. Sometimes they show strength to mask weakness. Sometimes they project confidence to hide uncertainty. The Strong Enemy Atlas could be a genuine training tool, or it could be theater. It's the same with the increasing number of military drills near Taiwan, or those dramatic state-run news videos showing tanks, jets, and fiery speeches. But as someone who's spent time following both US and Chinese defense strategies, I'll say this. While the US often focuses on deterrence and alliance building, China leans heavily on narrative control, controlling how their actions are perceived both at home and abroad. And right now, that narrative is clear. We're ready for a fight, and we're not afraid to show it. But here's where it gets interesting. In contrast to China's aggressive posture, the US military has been quietly repositioning itself across the Indo-Pacific. New security pacts like AUKUS, Australia, UK, US, the strengthening of Quad with India and Japan, and expanded access to bases in the Philippines all reflect one goal, preparedness. Not for war, but for deterrence. To me, the US strategy feels like a silent chess game, positioning pieces carefully, avoiding provocation, but never taking its eyes off the board. And honestly, that contrast between silence and spectacle says a lot. It reminds us that not all power is loud. So is China truly getting ready for war, or just trying to look powerful enough to avoid one? My gut tells me it might be both. Because sometimes the best way to avoid conflict is to convince the world you are more dangerous than you actually are. But when both sides start acting tough to prevent a fight, they sometimes stumble into one anyway. Which brings us to the next and perhaps most dangerous battlefield. The one you and I never see, but one that could shut down our hospitals, airports, and even our power grid. Let's talk about cyber warfare. What if the first shots of a modern war aren't fired from tanks or fighter jets, but through a Wi-Fi router? It sounds like a sci-fi thriller, I know, but in truth, it's already happening. The battlefield has shifted, and it's one we can't see. Earlier this year, reports confirmed that two Chinese hacker groups, Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon, had deeply infiltrated critical US infrastructure. We're talking power grids, water systems, telecommunications networks, even pipelines and transportation hubs. According to the Wall Street Journal, the breaches weren't just exploratory. They were strategic. They were laying the groundwork, not to crash systems now, but to be able to flip the switch when it counts most. Now here's where it gets even more concerning. In a closed-door meeting in Geneva, Chinese officials, while not fully admitting guilt, indirectly acknowledged these cyber intrusions. A senior cyber representative from China's foreign ministry allegedly told the US delegation that such attacks were responses to American military involvement in Taiwan. That's huge, because it's not just about cyber warfare anymore. It's cyber diplomacy turned weaponized. And honestly, that made me stop and think. Because for the average American, cybersecurity feels like some IT guy's job. But the truth is, our lives are more connected to it than we realize. Imagine waking up one morning and your city's power is out. Cell towers are silent. Hospitals can't access patient records. Planes are grounded. Emergency services go dark. That's not theoretical. It's possible. And the fact that a foreign state actor like China might already have the keys to those systems, that should concern all of us. But what makes it scarier is how subtle it all is. There's no dramatic invasion, no breaking news headline, just silence until something stops working. I think that's what makes cyber warfare so chilling. It's not about brute strength, it's about quiet power. It's the kind of warfare that doesn't scare you up front, but hits you when you're least prepared. And while the US government has been ramping up its cyber defenses, the truth is, we're still playing catch-up. Just last year, vulnerabilities in Cisco equipment were exploited. Even major telecom giants like AT&T and Verizon had to scramble to respond. This is no longer about hypothetical threats. It's already a reality. And personally, I believe cybersecurity is no longer just a national issue. It's a kitchen table issue. It affects your electricity bill, your online banking, your kids' school system. So if this is the invisible war of our time, what's the strategy to win? To answer that, we need to look at the people and the politics shaping America's response. And that means stepping into a familiar debate: Trump, Biden, and the future of U.S. strategy. Let's get into it. Sometimes what a leader chooses not to say speaks louder than what they do. When it comes to China, that silence or clarity can shape the course of global events. Let's talk about two very different presidents, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, because how each has approached China reveals two starkly different strategies and mindsets. During his first term, Trump drew sharp red lines. He said clearly, no military takeover of Taiwan, no more fentanyl flowing into American cities, and no more theft of American intellectual property. He backed those words with action. Tariffs, sanctions, public speeches that called out China by name. And whether you loved or hated his approach, there was no guessing where he stood. I remember watching one press conference where he said, if China invades Taiwan, the consequences will be unimaginable. That kind of language, raw, direct, was meant to send a message. Meanwhile, the Biden administration's tone has been different, less confrontational, more measured. On one hand, that's helped maintain communication between Washington and Beijing, something important in a time of tension. But on the other hand, it's left some allies and citizens confused about where the U.S. truly stands. Take fentanyl, for example. Under Trump, China was called out for allowing the export of precursor chemicals used to make the deadly drug. Under Biden, the rhetoric has softened, but the problem hasn't gone away. Fentanyl overdoses are still devastating families across the country. And while the administration has pushed for cooperation with China on this issue, results have been limited. Or let's look at Taiwan. The Biden team has expressed support for Taiwan, yes, but often in careful diplomatic terms. Strategic ambiguity, they call it. And I get that. But I also wonder, at what point does ambiguity stop being strategic and start being dangerous? Especially when the other side, China, is becoming more and more explicit in its threats. Personally, I think Americans deserve clarity. Not necessarily confrontation, but a clear, confident stance. Because in a world where cyber attacks are invisible, supply chains are global, and battles may be fought without boots on the ground, leadership needs to be steady, not vague. So what might the future of U.S. strategy look like? I believe it'll need to combine both approaches. Trump's boldness with Biden's diplomacy, firm red lines, but smart communication, tough consequences, but open channels, and most importantly, a strategy that puts American security, economy, and values first, without losing sight of the global picture. But China isn't just watching how we act on the outside, they're watching how we're divided on the inside, and that's something Xi Jinping may be betting on. So let's take a closer look at what's happening inside China's own leadership, where the real cracks may be starting to show. From the outside, China's leadership often looks like a fortress, unshakable, unified, and in full control. But on the inside, it's anything but. Behind the polished speeches and choreographed photo ops, there's a growing storm inside the Chinese Communist Party, and it starts with a group known as the princelings, the children and relatives of former high-ranking officials. These aren't rebels or dissidents, they're insiders. They grew up in power, with privilege, and in many cases, with massive assets overseas. And now they're worried, not about ideology, but about stability, and more specifically, about what could happen to their wealth if Xi Jinping pushes China too far. Reports have surfaced that some of these princelings have even tried to contact U.S. officials directly, warning that a war over Taiwan could trigger international sanctions, frozen bank accounts, and asset seizures in places like Switzerland, London, and New York. And honestly, I don't blame them for being nervous. Just look at what happened after Russia invaded Ukraine. Western governments froze over $300 billion in Russian assets. Yachts, villas, bank accounts, gone overnight. Now imagine you're a Chinese official with similar holding game. The message is clear. If war breaks out, your wealth isn't safe. But it's not just about money. There's also a deep sense of war fatigue within China's elite circles. Many retired military leaders and party elders, some of whom helped bring Xi to power, are starting to question whether he's gone too far. They fear that continued confrontation with the West could isolate China, ruin its economy, and push the country into a crisis it can't control. And what is striking is how subtle this resistance has become. People aren't holding signs in the streets, but they're skipping meetings, leaking information, quietly reshuffling positions. It's a political chess game, played in whispers. Personally, I find this part of the story fascinating because it reminds us that even the most powerful systems are still made up of people. People with fears, with families, with futures they want to protect. And when those people start to pull away, it signals that something fundamental is shifting. So what does this mean for Xi? It means his grip on power, while still strong, may be more fragile than it appears. And that fragility could shape how boldly or recklessly he moves forward. Because when a leader starts to lose the confidence of his inner circle, history tells us they often double down. Which brings us to the most personal part of this whole story. What happens next, not just between governments, but between people? Let's talk about what this all means for us, American families, businesses, and voters, and what we can learn from a conflict that feels far away, but hits much closer than we think. Let me ask you something. When you hear about China, do you think about politics or your paycheck? Because the truth is, this isn't just a story about leaders in suits making deals in faraway rooms. It's a story that reaches into your wallet, your workplace, and your weekend grocery run. And that's where this conversation becomes real. For American businesses, the U.S.-China relationship is more than a trade issue. It's a survival strategy. Over the last 2 decades, countless companies have built supply chains around cheap labor and massive production capacity in China. But today, many are rethinking that dependence. They're worried about instability. They're watching tariffs climb, regulatory pressures rise, and shipping costs surge. And they're asking, is it time to pull back? For consumers, the impact is already here. You've probably felt it, whether it's a spike in the price of electronics, delays on Amazon deliveries, or the quiet disappearance of certain products from shelves. This trade tension touches daily life, and yet it often flies under the radar because it's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it's real. Now, as for voters, there's an even bigger challenge, understanding the bigger picture without falling into oversimplification. It's easy to view China as the villain in this story, but the truth is far more nuanced. There's a common misconception that China's goal is simply to destroy the West. In reality, the Chinese Communist Party's first and foremost objective is to preserve its own power. Yes, it's assertive, yes, it's increasingly authoritarian. But much of its behavior, military moves, cyber intrusions, propaganda, is rooted in a deep fear of collapse from within. Understanding that doesn't excuse their actions, but it does help us respond smarter, not just louder. And that brings me to the most important point. How do we prepare? Because this conflict, like many modern crises, is unpredictable. It won't always look like traditional war. It will unfold in markets, on screens, in supply chains, and maybe even in our elections. So we need to stay informed, not just with headlines, but with context. We need to hold our leaders accountable for being clear, consistent, and courageous. And most of all, we need to stay united, because division at home weakens us abroad. And whether we like it or not, we are already part of this story. Personally, I believe this is a moment not just for strategy, but for self-reflection. As we've seen today, the US-China conflict is no longer just about tariffs. It's a full-scale geopolitical struggle that affects everything from global supply chains to the future of international relations. From Xi Jinping's risky strategy of power through confrontation to the hidden cyber warfare tactics, it's clear that the world is entering a new era of unpredictable tensions. And with both Trump and Biden offering contrasting approaches, the future of US strategy is uncertain, but crucial for us all. The internal struggles within China, particularly within the CCP, show cracks in its leadership, something the rest of the world must watch closely. As we wrap up, it's important to remember that these events don't just affect governments. They affect businesses, consumers, and everyday people. The decisions made today will shape the world of tomorrow. Now it's up to you to think critically about these dynamics. How do you think these tensions will unfold? What steps can businesses and consumers take to prepare for this shifting landscape? Don't just watch from the sidelines. Get involved in the conversation. Like, share, and comment below with your thoughts. What do you think the future holds? Let's discuss.